Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, CILA, for hosting this amazing event for all of us to learn through each other. My name is Chris. I work as an accompanied child advocate for Americans for Immigrant Justice here in Miami, Florida. Today, we are going to be talking about vicarious trauma, and the best practices for serving and honoring sexual abuse victims. So, there will be a lot of information covered, so I'd like to break this up into topics of discussion. The first topic, we will be focusing on definition, the different signs of sexual abuse, and also the myths. The second section, we're going to be focusing on creating a safe space for the clients that we work with. Then we're going to be learning about the different ways that we can support and actually empower these survivors. And lastly, the fourth will be self-care practices. So this is going to be a section all for us. I would like to give you all a little disclaimer. So we are going to do the presentation, and I'd love for you guys to have a safe space to ask questions. So we're just going to do them at the end. So please, if you want to leave any in the chat as any come to mind, feel free. And we're going to hold a safe space for Q&A afterwards. So as a disclaimer, this topic or the topics in this training are going to be sensitive for various reasons. So please feel free to take a moment if you need to at any point, turn your camera off, come back, and it's all good. So let's begin with what is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is defined as any type of sexual activity or contact, including rape, that happens without your consent. So it's important to note that this does not have to mean rape or penetration. It is anything that someone is uncomfortable with, anything sexual. And this is the definition and the context that we're going to be talking about during this presentation. So you might often hear the phrase sexual abuse victim or sexual abuse survivor, and they're kind of used interchangeably. But this term, sexual abuse victim, often belittles or creates pity for the person who experienced the violence, even if that's not your intention. But remember, abuse does not define a person. Abuse does not reduce them to only a victim. So that's why for this presentation, we will be using the term sexual abuse survivor. Because it is a way to empower those who have experienced abuse and see them as a whole person. So I would like to start off the presentation with a poll. The question will be, have you worked with a sexual abuse survivor? So on the next slide, there will appear a QR code for a Slido poll, which you can use your phone to capture, and it should take you right to the page. From my experience, it works better on your phone, but you can also put the link in your browser and put in the code that way. But let me see. Please let me know if anyone has any issues with this. Okay. Seems that we're getting responses. Okay, so many people have. Also, to everyone, these polls are anonymous, so don't feel scared to answer any of them. I'll just give people a little bit more. So while people are trickling in their answers, it's very evident, right, that we will encounter someone who is a survivor of sexual abuse. Unfortunately, this is very normal, specifically in the undocumented community that we do work with. All right. All right, so the next question will be, what is the greatest challenge in working with this population, with sexual abuse survivors? And this should automatically be in your Slido. Okay, so finding mental health resources for them, creating trust, building trust. It's a very big thing. Yes, I'm glad. Thank you for the person that said they were a sexual abuse survivor. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, building trust. Usually they're slow to open up and describe what happened. Knowing how to provide legal services without re-traumatizing them. Yes. Breaking through memory blocks, right? Making them feel safe. Balancing doing my job and the emotions and trying not to get triggered as a survivor myself. That is something that personally I have experienced as well, being a survivor myself. And that's why I think this topic is very important to talk about, protecting my mental health. Exactly. It affects everybody differently. The interview and the environment, reporting to law enforcement, making them feel safe, offering support. Yes. So all of these are very common experiences that we all have working with this population. Thank you so much all for sharing and being so detailed. And like everyone said, right, it is very hard to protect ourselves and maybe put that boundary when we are trying to offer as much help and support as we can for them. So everyone, thank you so much for participating. All right, so moving forward, give me 1 second here. So moving forward with statistics, studies show that the ages of 12 through 34 are the highest risk years for sexual violence, and that females ages 16 through 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims or people that have experienced these crimes. And in particular to the undocumented community that we do represent and work with, abusers sometimes use the immigration status of someone as an extra weapon of power, of control. So they may threaten to call immigration services if a victim challenges or reports domestic or sexual violence. So those who are undocumented may be particularly vulnerable and are to these type of threats because they fear being deported, right? They fear being turned into the police, and they're discouraged from speaking up. So it's really important to keep in mind that this issue is very much wide across the board, and that even if someone does not mention it, it could be that they have experienced this. So let's talk about the myths of sexual abuse. The first one that a lot of people hear is that the survivor is not telling the truth, or that they are enhancing the story, maybe because they want attention, right? We know that that is not true, but a lot of people have, especially victims and people that have experienced this, they internalize this, especially the clients as well. So it's important to know these myths. The second one is that the survivor provoked the abuse. It was maybe what they were wearing, maybe what they said, the person that they were with, they should have known better. The third is that, right, the survivor is at fault. It was their fault that this happened. And lastly, the fourth one is, why didn't they say something as soon as the abuse occurred, right? So we will use these myths to guide us, knowing that this is probably what they have internalized. We're going to use it to guide us into creating a safe environment for the clients that we work with. So the first step to effectively working with survivors is noticing the signs. So different children approach trauma differently. So remember that not every person that has endured trauma will have these signs. But remember, if they do mention it, it's always helpful for you to take note of them in your legal screenings, your intakes. So some of these include, in young children specifically, nightmares, maybe a fear of being alone at night, a change in eating habits, changes in mood or personality. Maybe if you have met with them multiple times, there's this increased aggression. There's a decrease in confidence, self-image. Maybe you find that they're always like looking down, excessive worry or fearfulness, increase of unexplained health problems. It could be stomach aches, headaches, loss of interest in school, activities, friends, and like we said, nightmares. And remember, these are all things that the children that we work with may be experiencing, because coming to the United States is traumatic. So they're not going to be an instant giveaway. But remember, if you do see these signs in children, make sure to jot them down. Next, the signs of sexual abuse in teens. Some of them are similar, but there are some differences that you might notice. And the first one might be STIs, right? Sexually transmitted infections. Maybe they have lack of energy, trouble sleeping, again, anxiety or worry, self-harming behavior, expressing thoughts about suicide or suicidal behavior, or if they have a history of drinking or drug use. Now, teens may not tell us all of this, right? But in the case that they do, it's very important for you to recognize the signs and know that it could mean that they have been sexually abused in the past. So now that we know what to look out for, let's turn our attention to creating a safe space for the child and the clients that we work with. So how to respond, right? You want to make the child feel heard. For many, you may be the first person that they share this with. Or perhaps maybe they did share with a family member and they were not believed by their family. And this is their first time opening up again. And it's your job, right, not to fix the situation. You can't fix that they were abused, but it's your job to create that safe space and let them know that you're here to listen and not judge. So you want to vocalize to them, I believe you. This is not your fault. No matter what happened, right? This is not your fault. You want to remain calm and let the child really guide the conversation to make sure that you don't re-traumatize them with questions. So you want to use your best judgment as you are getting more details on what happened. And remember, the most important role to take is to be a support for them and to validate their feelings, no matter what. And if you can make them feel heard, right, we're one step closer to helping them in their healing journey. Right, we can't fix it, but we can take different tools to make sure that we're being helpful in the present moment. So things to avoid, and these are things that I have noticed and I have to personally take into account when I'm doing my legal screenings, because sometimes it's not very obvious to us, but it is obvious to the child. So even though you're hearing something that's very sad, very traumatic even for you, right? Do not panic and don't overreact, because this can really scare the child away. Don't press the child to talk. Don't overwhelm them with questions. Something very important when we are trying to be a support is sometimes we want to say, you're safe now, right? But it's important to not promise things that you cannot control, because if you do, it can further impact or re-traumatize the child. So avoid saying things like, this won't happen again, you're safe now, because you don't know that and you can't control that. You can only control how you are behaving in the present for them. And then lastly, do not confront the abuser. And this is for reasons of confidentiality, but also for safety, right? This could put the child's life and well-being at risk, and it could worsen the situation for them and lead them not to trust you. And specifically, when explaining confidentiality to a child, refrain from using phrases like, it's like a secret, right? Sometimes when we're working with little kids, we want to We want to use age-appropriate language to make them understand different things. But if you say this can be a secret, or it's like a secret, it could be triggering for them, because oftentimes that is what abusers will tell children, right? Don't tell your mom, don't tell your dad, it's a secret. So you want to make sure that you explain that you're here to support them, and tell them specifically that you will not tell anyone they don't want you to tell. Okay, so working with clients and speaking to teens is a little bit easier because you're able to gather more information. Maybe you can explain concepts in more detail in a way that you would to an adult. And working with tender age minors is specifically a challenge, and it's something that I have had to gain experience in, because it's not easy, and you have to take a different approach. So working with tender age minors, you want to make sure, again, right, you're using age-appropriate language that they can understand. And a lot of times you can't flat out ask them, have you been abused? They might not know what abuse means, right? So you want to explain the concept of feeling unsafe. And you may say, right, children often feel unsafe, and they might feel sick in their tummy, right? And the importance of this is that because children need a way to name their feelings, so that they can be able to understand different situations. So if they can name the feeling that they have felt uncomfortable or unsafe in a certain situation, you're heading in the right direction. So use maybe variations like you might feel sick in your tummy, or you might feel a little bit wobbly when you feel these feelings of unsafe, or your chest might hurt. And then you want to ask them, have you ever felt this feeling before? And if they say yes, you can ask them, have you ever felt unsafe around someone? Is this someone in your family? Is this someone you know? Is this a stranger? And that will usually guide the child to respond to you and let them know, right, that you are not trying to just get information at them. You're genuinely trying to understand where they're coming from and meet them at where they're at. You can also use pictures, age-appropriate pictures, and you can ask them to point if they have ever been touched anywhere that has made them feel unsafe or sick or icky. And remember, it's always important to remind the child that it's okay to say no to being touched. I think specifically growing up in a Hispanic household, we're often not given that agency. And so many kids, right, they come in and they might not know that they have the power to say no, maybe. And so it's always important to tell them, right, you have the power to say no to being touched. You have the power to say no when you are feeling uncomfortable. And then the last thing that I have here is ask if anyone has ever asked you to keep a secret. And you want to make sure that you differentiate between good and bad secrets. And you can say good secrets often lead to making people happy, and are often short-term. They could be a surprise. Whereas bad secrets, they make you feel scared or uncomfortable. And then ask them, have you ever had to keep a bad secret before? And again, this is just another way for the child to feel that they are at your level, or that you're understanding them. All right, so now let's focus on supporting and empowering survivors. And it's important to note, right, the types of behaviors. Sometimes kids will not open up to us, and that is normal. Different children approach trauma differently, and feel free to take note of those behaviors that you're seeing in your intakes. So something I like to do is I like to make a note if a child is restless, if they're tapping their foot a lot, if they get quiet at a specific question. And this also helps attorneys as well get a clearer picture of their intake or of what could be going on. But if a child is not opening up or giving you details to work with, right, remember that these are ways of coping. They have not felt safe and have had to process this a lot of the times by themselves. So be patient. It takes time to build that trust. especially with someone who just came to the United States, right? They don't know who to trust, or they could have not been listened to or believed in the past. So remember, just by you as an adult showing concern and helping these kids, right, can help them heal and build resilience as well. Another important thing is that you want to offer choices. So tell the child, right, you have the choice to sit, right, wherever you want. So where would you like to sit for this conversation? What is your preferred name? And you need to tell them that they have agency and they have control. So at AIJ, we always ask them, right, what is your preferred name? Even if it's the same name that you see in your intake sheet, that sometimes they're surprised that they're able to give us a nickname, maybe. And me, just by calling them by a nickname, they feel more safe. They feel more that they're at home and maybe like in a family. And always make sure, right, that to tell them that they are not required to answer any question that they don't feel comfortable with. Specifically for younger clients, I like to give them a choice of Legos or coloring books, any drawings, just to make them feel a little bit more safe. And then another very important thing is you want to establish safe and predictable patterns. So I know that the space that we meet with children is often a little bit limited based on where you're meeting. Oftentimes I'm placed in a dorm room, which can be specifically triggering for sexual abuse survivors. So always ask them, right, if they're okay. Let them know that they're always in control, and let them know that they can tell you how they're feeling. All right. So it's important to acknowledge that this is a stressful experience and you can't change it, but you can validate the client, and you can empower them. Another way is by respecting confidentiality. It's super huge, because this is their story and they are in control of who knows and who's allowed to know and how they tell it. So remember, your job is to focus in the present with them, not to advise them to speak out about this, but just to be there for them. You want to believe them and you want to validate their experience. Something I always tell people is listen to understand and not respond. Sometimes as advocates or as attorneys, we are crunched for time and we want to file these intakes. But if you're not listening to understand the client, we're not doing our job. Remind them that they are not alone. And if a minor appears to not be stressed, you can let them know that 1 out of 3 women have experienced sexual assault. Because a lot of times they think that they're the only ones that have experienced this, and they're not able to vocalize that because they feel alone. And then you also want to remind them that this is an injustice, this is not right, and that it's not their fault. And then lastly, you want to respect their autonomy, like we said, and they will make decisions when they are ready. They know their body's the best and they will make those decisions for them. And then number 5, I'm sorry, you want to have good body language. So your actions as an advocate matter. And something that I always like to remind myself and do is to move away from the computer. If I can, I would, put the computer to the side completely and just give my client undivided attention, because you can make notes later, but how you start a conversation with the minor is everything. And that is what's going to build that trust. Specifically for younger kids, it's always best practice to get down on their level. So I refrain from sitting on a desk and sitting across from them, because that could be intimidating to them. And oftentimes I will sit on the floor, or if there's a little chair, I will sit on the chair with them, sit next to them, asking them, right, is it okay if I sit here? And that will often give them a little bit more trust in you. And then also don't make faces, right, that show judgment, even if what they were saying is really sad or it's affecting you, because it can scare the child. And lastly, along with your body language, choose words of support and empowerment. And this could sound like, thank you for telling me, right? It took a lot of courage for you to share this with me. Thank you. You didn't do anything to deserve this. You're not alone. All of these things coupled together can really make the difference for a child, for a survivor, because maybe for the first time, they're actually feeling heard. So I know that when giving intakes, you're often on a time crunch, and it may be hard, right, to remember every single training that you've ever received on this subject. So along with AI Justice, we have created a checklist for you that will be shared afterwards, after the synopsis. And it's a little checklist of things that you can bring that can make a difference for the child. So carrying tissues, coloring books, Legos, sensory toys, kids really love those, picture books, drawing paper, right? All of that, you start to see the child as a person and not so much as their trauma. Important questions, you can ask them, where do you want to sit? Is it okay if I sit here? Are you comfortable in this room? Maybe you're in a dorm room. Do you need anything at this time before we start? Would you like to take a break? All these questions, they might seem small to you, but make the world of difference for them, because they are actually being taken seriously. And then it's also hard to translate sometimes what you would say in English to Spanish. So we have also included translations here for you as well, right? Yo te creo, tú te mereces ser tratado con respeto, eres muy valiente, se necesita mucho valor para compartir esto conmigo. All of these phrases to them mean the world. And as a survivor, right, if someone told me this at that young age, it would have made a big difference for me. So in conclusion, for this part, we cannot fix or change the sexual trauma that a child has gone through, but we can use these tools to better support and better empower the survivors, and make that difference for them. So by listening and validating their experiences, we can become part of their healing journey, and be a support for them. Okay, so now this one is for us. So the self-care practices. As an unaccompanied child advocate and attorneys, right, our role is to provide support and honor the stories of all immigrant children. And many of those stories include very graphic scenes of violence, of sexual violence, abuse, that they have experienced in their lives. And that ultimately takes a big toll on us emotionally. And it can be very triggering for us. So as humans, we feel empathy, we feel compassion. And that's very important, right? To be an advocate, you need to feel those things to do your job. But sometimes that can be triggering for us and can lead to extreme fatigue, maybe burnout, periods of depression, and all of that ultimately will affect our quality of service that we can provide to the clients. So one of the most important realizations for us is that the practices that we do, our advocacy, right, to children can be limited by the lack of advocacy that we give ourselves, right? So we will look at different practices, both self-caring, self-soothing, and we'll talk about the differences between the two and when to incorporate what. And then also, we can ensure, right, to have a grounded perspective, to honor the experiences of minors, and then also honoring our needs by listening to our bodies as well. So as a poll question, some of you have already answered this, but we'll do another Slido. So what is an emotional challenge that you experience while meeting with clients with traumatic stories? Protecting my mental health, yes. Wanting to cry. Guilt of not being able to fully relate. Okay. That's actually very important. not waking up my own traumatic feelings, wanting to fix things, very hard not to show emotion, guilt, the urge to not comfort them by hugging or touching their hand. Sometimes I realize later that I relate to an experience. Keeping my emotions neutral. Unknowingly making the child realize that the abuse was worse than they believed. Yes. Yes, that's something that I have encountered as adults. We have more knowledge, more context to situations. And I'm always super careful in the way that I phrase things because I don't want to make them feel worse of the trauma that they have endured. Feeling guilty if I cut it short because of job obligations, yes. Not finding the right words at the moment. Becoming too detached when it's difficult, yes. Anger of what they have gone through and not being able to get them to counseling or therapy that they need. I think a big theme that we're seeing here is wanting to do more and wanting to fix the situation, knowing that we really can't. Keeping my emotions under control. All right. Okay, I had to take a deep breath for that one. Not having social services, caring for without taking care of client. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Hope there's a little bit more coming in. As you all are reading these responses, feel free to take a deep breath as well, because I know that it can be triggering just to put yourself back in that place. All right. All right, so a lot of what everyone has been, of what everybody has been saying is actually vicarious trauma. So that is the passage of trauma or experiencing secondhand trauma from someone else's story. And that is something that many legal service providers encounter or experience at some point in their career. And know that you guys are not alone, and that's why we're here. So in these following slides, I invite you all to be honest, right? Be gentle with yourself, but be honest. Have I experienced this? There are things such as compassion fatigue, which it is that you may find yourself emotionally tired after an intake or coming home. And it can be really hard to even take a deep breath. There's also hypervigilance, where you're so completely focused on your job and wanting to do more for the kids that we work with, and you're always on. Even when nothing can be done, you're still thinking about them. Perhaps you might bring work stress and these traumatic stories home with you, and then it can turn into guilt. It can be that you can't enjoy your time off because you're thinking of the suffering of other people. And you have guilt for having a good life or not being able to relate to these situations. And then you might also feel that you might not know how to ask for help. And something that an AILA self-care training mentioned is that attorneys specifically, they are trained not to ask for help. They're trained to always be in control, straight out from law school, from the bar. And similarly, right, these expectations can cause burnout in service providers. And then the worst thing, right, that can happen arguably is disassociation. And that is when you numb yourself so that you don't have to feel this secondhand trauma so you can do your job. Now, I want to first say, right, be gentle with yourself if you do experience these things. But remember that the root of our stress is our want for change and our want for to make a difference for these children, our compassion, right, our empathy. And these are all amazing qualities to have. And it's what makes a great advocate, right, a great support for them. However, you can't be an advocate if you are not advocating for your own needs and setting these boundaries. And boundaries can look different from person to person. It can often be a challenge to know where to start. So let's start looking at the differences between self-soothing practices and then self-care practices. So self-soothing practices are done in the moment. So they are done in times of present stress and anxiety. And you might find yourself doing breathing exercises, listening to music, putting on a cozy show or a movie, the use of aromatherapy and essential oils. Those are all great things to do. But all of these things, without setting intentions for them, become distractions. So many of us will watch a show or we'll watch a movie, we'll listen to music, but that only distracts yourself. It's not actually self-care, right? Because it doesn't fix our issues. So this is where the importance of self-care practices come into play. So self-care practices are done every day. They're little things that you do every day with intention of prioritizing yourself to prevent burnout. And the intention, right, is to prioritize yourself. So this is how we prevent burnout, because every day you are setting an intention for your day, which turns into your life, rather than only during those stressful moments. So this can look like many things. It can be practicing meditation. It can be having a workout routine. It can be journaling consistently. If you're already in your spiritual journey, you can do rituals that feel calming for you. And it's important to say, right, that please do not feel bad or do not feel down if you are not doing these things every single day, right? Because these practices are much harder to keep up with. But the reason I'm including them is so that we know the difference and we know what to incorporate so that they can make a difference for us. So why is it so hard, right? We're going to debunk the myths of self-care in the workplace. So work and self-care are complete opposites of each other, we can think. Work is tied to fast-paced environments, deadlines, stress. And on the other side, right, self-care is to relax, to disconnect. So we might not think that these two can possibly work together. And that has been ingrained in us because of these myths of self-care. So the first myth is self-care is just pampering and I don't need it. And this is the biggest myth, right? Because sometimes we live in so much stress that in order for us to cope with it, we're just on autopilot. So really check in with yourself. Maybe you can journal about how you have been feeling and be honest with yourself, right? Remember that by journaling, no one else is going to read it. It's just you and your thoughts. And even if you don't find yourself feeling stressed, self-care is an inherent need that we all have as human beings, right? I think arguably everybody needs self-care. You don't have to be going through something specific to have that self-care for yourself. The second one is that self-care takes too much time. We're already working a 9 to 5. And then along with our personal responsibilities, right, self-care is often on the back burner. But something as little as a 1 minute moment of silence, just for yourself, or reading affirmations to yourself, that takes a minute and a half, and they can really prompt the difference for your day. And then the third one is something that we really, as a community, need to unlearn, is that self-care is earned, right? So we often hear people say, if I complete this assignment, I can take a break and I can do some self-care as a reward. But this idea contributes to the notion or the idea that we're only deserving of self-care if we work hard. But, right, we can't work hard if we're not taking care of ourselves. Remember that self-care is not transactional. You're deserving of spending time with yourself, and you don't need to work hard or do it as a reward. So debunking these self-care myths are the key to overcoming the self-care mental blocks that we might have, and can lead us into creating more healthy habits. So I have broken up the self-care into 4 different types: the emotional, the physical, social, and the spiritual. And while I read these off, I invite you all to ask yourself, right? What does my body need? What does my soul need? So emotional self-care can look like practicing saying no. It's okay to say no to things. If you feel like you cannot handle it, right? Being honest with yourself is the best thing that you can be. Saying affirmations, right? I'll give you all examples of this a little bit down the line in the presentation. Allowing yourself to feel without judgment. I think that's a big one for us. Remember that your emotions are not something for you to judge yourself off. Adult coloring books or exercises, and then practicing gratitude by journaling. So something that I like to do and like to incorporate in my routine is that at night I will journal about my day. It can be something, very small. I will say something I'm proud of for doing that day, and then something that I'm grateful for, and something that I want to do tomorrow. It could be a bullet point list, and that trains your mind for you to start prioritizing yourself, and preps you for the next day. So there's also physical self-care. It can be yoga, strength training, taking a walk, and even down to stretching. Anything that you can do to get your body moving will help you release those emotions. There's also social self-care, which is you could take a class, you can reach out to friends and family, or it could be the opposite. You could be in need of placing boundaries with certain people. Boundaries in, I don't know, maybe going out, right? These are all different things to listen to yourself about and remind yourself that it's okay to take this time for you. And then spiritual self-care. This is your time alone. So this is any meditation that you do, any connection to nature that you can do, step outside, journaling, creating a sacred space. If you have any rituals, right, feel free to do those. These are all things that you do by yourself to create the life that you want. So self-care looks different for everybody. And I invite you all to comment one thing that you wish that you had time to do. And I say wish loosely because we can actually have a work-life balance by setting these small goals. So as you guys are writing that, it's important, right, to know that the only way for us to create a routine is to start small, because otherwise we're not going to do it. So do one small task every single day. It can be reading an affirmation to yourself first thing that you wake up in the morning before you check your phone. It can be writing it down on a sticky note, putting it on your bedside table. Anything like that works. You also want to plan. So you want to set specific times for an activity. So if you don't build that time in, you won't do it, right? For most of us. So you can set a reminder on your phone, on a physical planner. Give yourself a visual checklist for you to have. So as soon as you do an activity, check it off. And for those that like to use physical journals or sticky notes, the mind to body action of actually writing it out and checking it off will actually produce more motivation for you and motivate you to keep going. And then lastly, it is a reward. Remember, a lot of times people think that self-care is the reward, but self-care is really hard, right? It's not easy to do. It's not easy to have a routine. So please reward yourself after you do that and for taking the time to prioritize yourself. So remember, when you have a physical care balance, you can incorporate these healthy boundaries in the workplace. Remember that the biggest thing you can realize is that your individual self-care directly affects the level of care that you can give to a client. So I would like to provide you guys with little tips on how to not take work home with you. So personally, what I like to do is I like to do a little ritual or affirmation before entering my home. So I can say, I did my very best today to meet with the clients, do everything that I possibly could within that 9 to 5. And now I need to rest, I need to recharge so that I can go back and do it again tomorrow. You also could do a cleansing shower, and it's kind of like a meditation, talking to yourself, and then kind of using that shower, that water, to cleanse yourself from those thoughts. You can also set your intentions for the day. So before you go into work, say, I will do everything that I can to fulfill those intentions during the workday. And then after that, I'm proud of myself, but that's it. I will wait until the next day. And then block out do not disturb time for yourself. And this weekend specifically, from my own experience, I had to take my own advice, and I felt so burnt out with Florida's recent anti-immigration law. As a DACA recipient myself, so I needed to take my vacation time because I needed that time off. So remember, it's always okay for you to use your vacation, your health leave. That matters to you, not just as an employee, an advocate, right? But also as a human being. So as a reminder, right, be gentle with yourself. Sometimes self-soothing practices are what you are capable of doing for that day. Maybe you're not doing a meditation or you're not journaling, right? But that's okay. We're all doing what we can each day. Remember that self-care doesn't have to be done alone. So if you're someone who needs social interaction to kind of keep yourself motivated, keep yourself accountable, that can happen, right? You know yourself. And then we all do such amazing work for others, but we must show humility to ourselves as well and know when to pause and take that moment for ourselves. So I always like to remind my coworkers, right, the same way that we would show compassion to a client is the same way that we should show compassion to ourselves. And with that, I would like to end the presentation with some affirmations for you. So feel free to join me in closing your eyes, lowering your gaze, if you feel comfortable. And I'll give you a little bit to get comfortable. I am deserving of compassion for myself. I am strong, but I am deserving of rest. My fatigue does not make me weak. I am allowed to embrace good things in life and feel joy. I deserve to put my needs first. I am always learning. And finally, I embrace my needs and my power. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I have also provided you all with resources on your journey on how to get started. So if you are someone who would benefit from therapy, there's a website that you can go to, and it's called Elma, and it actually allows you to filter for the type of therapist that you want, and then also for your insurance. So that's a neat thing that they do. And then also you can filter for in-person or remote therapy, whatever works best for you. Meditations that you can try. Personally, I love Tara Brach, and you can find these on YouTube. Rain meditation is really good if you are feeling stressed or you're feeling stuck in your body. And essentially it's a body scan. So you will start from toe to head. And it will guide you on what to do with your body to release that tension. And then if you're a yoga person, you could go on YouTube, and Yoga with Adrienne is always really good to try. And then additionally, I have some journal prompts and templates for you. So this will be shared with you all after the synopsis. But essentially, it's a 3 self-compassion exercise, additionally with journal prompts. So it looks like this. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to write things out. And I have this self-compassion template for you. So you can start thinking of a difficult situation, and it actually guides you through what can make you feel better, what have you done in the past to make yourself feel better. And it's a really good exercise for you all to try. So thank you all for this space to share my experience that I have learned through my colleagues, and then my personal experience, and the different tips that I have learned along the way to create a safe environment for our clients. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can also email me at ccanfuda@AIjustice. But I now open the space for all of you. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Chris. We've received a couple of questions so far in the chat. So the first one is, how do we encourage boys who were abused?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the notion, right, is that only girls suffer through this. And within my intakes, I always ask them, are you familiar with abuse? And some of them will be like, yeah, I've been learning about it in school. And I'm like, okay, cool. So, there's physical abuse, and there's verbal abuse or sexual abuse. And I ask them, has anyone ever made you feel uncomfortable? And I start with that question first, because I don't want to flat out say or scare them off by just saying, have you been sexually abused? Because a lot of them, they might not respond to that. And I have had boys that when asking them, has anyone made you feel uncomfortable or touched you in a way that made you feel uncomfortable, they will open up to me. And it's the same way as telling them, just because you're a boy doesn't mean that you are alone, or that this actually does happen to a lot of men as well. And it's the same way that you would treat a woman, a girl. They deserve that type of treatment as well.
Thank you. We received a question about that boundary between work and home that you were talking about, and they wanted to know, do you have any suggestions on this boundary when you work remotely?
Yes, I work remotely as well, half of my days when I'm not going into the facility. And something that I have found really useful is I have a specific desk and area that I will work from. So I will not work from my couch. I will not work from my room. I have a specific area. I don't even eat there, because I don't like to associate my sacred space, being my home, with the stress of work. And it took me a while to put 2 and 2 together, right? That's what was causing me stress. But once I did that, I did find it easier to separate the two.
Thanks. We've received another question about, clients who are applying for asylum. We have to ask them to describe incidents of abuse. How do you avoid re-traumatizing them if a lot of the questions are necessary questions?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest, or one of the biggest, I should say, worries for us, because in order for us to help them, right, they need to give us that information. And I really like to start small. Sometimes it does take, I have attorneys who will do multiple follow-ups with them, because maybe they need a break, or maybe you caught them at a wrong time. So if you do have the resources and the staff available, 1, I would recommend doing multiple follow-ups, and 2, I would keep the same attorney consistent so that they're not going to have to, open up again to another person. But I think, yeah, my tip would be to start small, and giving them the space and telling them, the more you tell me, the more I'm able to help you. But again, you are in control.
And Chris, I know you've already shared some handouts, but someone asked if the affirmations that you led us through in that exercise, are those in a handout? Because they would love to put them on the inside of their door and see them before they go
That's so
out.
cute. I have not actually, but I can provide them to CILA afterwards to share.
Great, thank you. We'll put those on the symposium website, and also we'll post them later when all the recorded trainings get posted. I believe those are all the questions. Please put in the chat if I missed it or you have additional questions, everyone.
Yes. And if not, feel free to email me as well. Just checking over the chat. Terry said consistently practicing yoga. And I do, even if it's not yoga, right? If you are consistent with something small, that's going to make a big difference for you. And that's a great point to make from Terry. But yes, if anyone does not have any other questions, I think that we're good.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Chris. This was an amazing presentation, and we're really appreciative of all your wealth of knowledge you shared with us.
Thank you for having me and giving us the platform to share with everyone.